Welcome back to the Six Piece Podcast. We're looking at Chapter 8 today from The Longest Memory, entitled Cook. So this is another chapter from Cook's perspective. It's her second and final chapter. And she opens by reflecting on her job and the love that she has for her family through a metaphor of her pots and what she's cooking for both the family she is enslaved to, as well as her husband and son. Now, when Chapel doesn't respond to her calls, she finds him secretly reading with Lydia. She's shocked, but quite moved by it as well. She promises herself to keep this a secret, knowing that Whitechapel would not condone Chapel's reading, and the tone in this particular chapter is one of great pride and love for her son. With that, obviously, love is one of the main themes here. We can also look though at education and family, and the way that Cook feels about her family, which is emphasised by her previous abuse, particularly at the hands of Sanders Sr. We also have notions of freedom and equality here as well, in terms of the fact that she wants to protect what Chapel is doing. Chapter 8, Cook. All my life, 2 pots are never empty. One is in the master's kitchen, the other is my own. I sometimes take from one to fill the other, or, after the sight of the first one all day, I can hardly face the second. The 2 pots are never empty. My master's pot is full of the best things my hands will touch and my belly won't see. Yet my pot is sweeter to me. Sweet because I take from it and fill 2 plates for the people I love, my husband and my son. I'm stirring my master's pot when I absently call my son. He does not hear me, though he cannot be far from the kitchen. I call him a second time. Again, nothing. I turn from the pot, which can do without me standing over it for a little while, and walk from the kitchen expecting to collide with him dashing in to answer my call. Nothing. Then I hear a voice that is my son's and not my son's. It comes from the room where the master keeps his books, a room even I have not dared to enter. The door is pushed to the point of being closed. I put my ear to the crack and hear my son's voice speaking as I have never heard it before. He sounds as if he is standing at a pulpit, or like the master sounds when he says prayers to the whole plantation at Christmas. I put my eyes to the crack and see Lydia, the darling of the house, reclined in a chair with her eyes shut. The voice of my son still sounds loud and clear. I tilt my head a fraction to the left and see that he is sitting opposite her, with a book in his hands, reading. Chapel, reading. Chapel, speaking. Not from memory, but lifting words from a book with his eyes. My Chapel. I have to cover my mouth to catch the scream that parts my lips. I back away from the door on my toes. My son's voice fades. Then I turn and run, still on my toes, back to my station in the kitchen. I hear nothing except my heavy breathing. A gurgling and spluttering sound drowns my breathing, and I realise I am staring into the open pot of beef stew on the fire. I steady myself before the pot where Chapel will find me when he comes bounding around the corner, then shout his name. I don't wait for his answer. I holler again. At last he answers in a voice I recognise. He runs up to me and hugs me before I can turn to face him. How quick he is on his feet these days. I ask him to fetch me some water for the pot in our cabin, the other pot that waits for me. His face is shining. His eyes are bright. What have you been up to? I ask. He says, daydreaming. Where? Not far. I warn him against wandering around the house and remind him that Mr. Sanders' son was excluded because the master felt he was too much of a distraction for Lydia. Chapel says Mr. Sanders' son only wanted to play and talk when Lydia probably wanted to study, and therefore the master was right to exclude him. I remind him that his duty in this house is to assist me in the kitchen. I can't bring myself to tell him not to open a book. I can't even mention the fact that I've heard him with my own ears and saw him too poring over a book. I want to summon some disdain before I tell him what I saw and heard, but all I feel inside is pride. Not fear, not yet, just pride, swelling my chest and filling my heart. My son can open a book and sound like the master. I stare at the pot and smile. He wants to know what pleases me so much, and I swivel around in his embrace until I'm facing him and return his big squeeze. All I say is I'm happy because I have everything I could want in a husband and son. I watch him leave. He's just out of my sight when a worry replaces him. What do I say to his father? I try to convince myself that what I saw was harmless and innocent, but I can't deny the bald fact that Chapel was sitting in the master's quiet room reading to Miss Lydia. I turn my mind back to the pot and wonder what I can conjure up for the second one that waits for me to warm it, fill it, and make it sing with its sweetness. I am his mother. I can't say, "Son, books are not for you. Reading is not for you. Books will only bring you trouble. Books will only increase the number of things you have to worry about." I will not do it. Nor will I get my husband to do it. Since Chapel has kept this grand secret from me all his time in the house, he can keep it hidden a little longer. Miss Lydia? Well. Surprise knows no boundaries. I tell the pot I'm sorry as if it were my husband. Husband, I love you and tell you everything, but there is one thing I cannot tell you because I know what you would do if you knew about it. You would tell my son that he cannot read, that books and slaves do not agree. You would hold up your glorious life as an example of the slave who has done all the proper things to survive and earn the respect of the master and overseer. I can hear you, my husband. Your voice is strong and clear, but without the strength and clarity of the voice of my son as he lifts word after word from the pages of a book. What I heard must not be taken from him. The pot gurgles and sputters and goes quiet when I stir it. I think of the other pot. I plan something sweet for it. Something my husband and son will smell so far from our cabin, they will doubt such sweetness is coming from their home. But it will become stronger as they get nearer to our house, and perhaps they will be forced to break into a run to see for themselves. So another short chapter, and a handful of quotations to have a look at. The first quote we'll look at is probably one of the most referenced in essays, and it's the metaphor of the two pots. So Cook says, "All my life, the two pots are never empty. My master's pot is full of the best things my hands will touch, but my belly won't see, yet my pot is sweeter to me. Sweet because I take from it and fill two plates to the people I love, my husband and my son." So here we've got one pot for her enslaver, Mr. Whitechapel and his family, and one for her own. So while the one for Mr. Whitechapel might be of high materialistic value, it's got better ingredients you'll never be able to taste. She much prefers what she makes for her family, which emphasizes the love she has for them and how it provides her with a purpose in life. I think, though, this quotation is tinged with a little bit of sadness, because the fact that she's always got these pots going on suggests the nature of her work, being an enslaved human, trapped to her work and trapped to her status, and the menial nature of the work she does as well. The second quotation we're going to look at today comes up after she catches Chapel and Lydia reading, when Cook says, "I want to summon some disdain before I tell him what I saw and heard, but all I feel inside is pride." Not price. Sorry, pricey. Pride. Not fear, not yet, just pride, swelling in my chest and filling my heart. This quotation is all about pride. Absolutely what she feels for her son, that overwhelming emotion. And this is a really positive chapter in terms of tone, that overwhelming love she has for her family, particularly her son. And there's a bit of repetition here, because in Chapel's chapter 5, he closes by saying, "I feel joy and not fear." So again, you've got that connection between the two generations, between Chapel and his mother. The next quotation, "My son can open a book and sound like the master." Again, the benefits of education, and I guess the status here, and maybe having or critiquing the status within this society. The penultimate quote, "Books will bring you trouble. books will only increase the number of things you have to worry about. Again, it shows her concern and the inequality within this society, and unfortunately a bit of dramatic irony, because we know it's through reading and learning about the world and his relationship with Lydia that will lead partly to his tragic death. And the last one, what I heard must not be taken from him. This is the trust and love that Cook has. She knows that her husband won't be happy to find out that Chapel is reading. Here, she aims to placate both her husband and son's dreams and desires. And the pot allows her to do this because she's going to make something super sweet for them. So I like how there's that nice cyclical nature of this chapter. We start by talking about the pot and the importance of the pot for her, and then also the importance of the pot for her family too. So 2 things to compare with this particular chapter and the 7 stages of grieving. Just 2 I'm going to look at today. Of course, there's so much more. The first one is the idea of subservience, which I don't think we've looked at yet, but is something that comes up throughout the text, particularly when it comes to the character of Whitechapel. So there's those people in society with little to no power who accept that position and those that don't. So Chapel doesn't accept his position as being an enslaved human. He wants more out of his life, hence he escapes. Now in this chapter, Cook states about Whitechapel, "You would tell my son he cannot read, that books and slaves do not agree. You would hold up your own glorious life as an example of a slave who has done all the proper things to survive." This notion that Whitechapel is subservient to his position, and he thinks that is the way to live. Compare that to 7 stages of grieving and from the scene 23, that we're being taught to cry quietly. Again, this notion that First Nations people need to live by guidelines of what they're told. They need to grieve quietly. They need to be hidden, that it shouldn't be out in the open. In fact, it comes up in scene 2, sobbing, when the wailing appears off the stage where the audience can't actually see it. This notion that First Nations people are being subservient to what's expected of them, and comparing that, say, to Whitechapel, and maybe as a contrasting that with the character of Chapel. Think as well about the use of symbols. So the metaphor of the pots we sort of spoke about before, which Cook talks about, represents and reflects the love and sense of belonging and the importance of her family to her. And I thought you can compare that to the Red Earth in scene 17 of Home Story. So the Red Earth is meant to represent family. In this scene, it's meant to represent the complex nature of the kinship systems. Here, at the very end of the scene, the woman takes several handfuls of red earth from the grave and makes a large pile on the floor, and at the very end she flays her arm through the remaining large pile and the circle and destroys it all. So think about the fact that that notion of family and the connection to family and the connection to land has been taken away from the First Nations people here. That's what this scene is all about. So the contrasting representations of family of the pots and the red earth. And in fact, the red earth also comes up in scene 13 with Auntie Grace. She fills her suitcase with that. It allows her to reconnect with her culture and her family or identity, and I guess it's a representation of the land as well, and the importance of land and the connection between land and culture too. So again, some comparison between, I guess, not just similarities, but also differences in this particular chapter.